reality back up.
Jesus' incarnation.
It forces the mind to be creative. Are just on a different path.
We completely disregard everything they've ever said or done as a result of that.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Oz Table Talk. My name's Luke and I'm at the table with Dave, Ben and Dr. Dan. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Dan.
So if you have watched our previous episode in this series, you would have seen us talk about David, and so you probably already know Dan, but for those who are jumping in at this point, Dan, can you introduce yourself? And maybe for anybody that
Something different?
have seen both, share something a little bit different.
My life is not that exciting. I don't know if there's more different things. What else do I like doing? I live in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. In a property by choice. I live in a regional Queensland town by choice as well in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Mexico. There you go.
You didn't mention that last
Something
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't mention?
No, I don't think you mentioned it.
I'm originally from Mexico. Been in Australia for almost 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in my spare time, I am a psychologist.
Yes, that's on.
Yes, because that's not any kind of commitment.
Well, I always say that, and actually, I don't know if that's how my website has it, but I hope it does. Otherwise, I'll have to go and change it. The reason for that is I want to believe that that's not what defines my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a lot
I liked how
of-
you introduced yourself last time. You said, first of all, you are a husband and a father and a child of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's
I
your
should let
primary
Charlie go
commitment.
first.
Yeah.
Hey, look, we got what you meant.
Yeah.
That's your
100%.
primary responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's a good way to
100%.
look at it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question off
Sure,
the
go
cuff.
ahead.
He has no preparation for this.
Okay.
Tell us something surprising
let me
about
see my
yourself.
That's okay. We don't have any preparation for anything. What are you talking about?
Something surprising about Dan.
That I think is surprising.
Yeah, something that would be surprising to people that don't know you.
I this was said in the other episode though.
Yeah.
But I know that when I do, for example, I do therapy groups and parents groups and things like that, and we always talk about something about yourself. And we do this thing that I half resent, but it's part of the process. Sometimes I do it with somebody else, another therapist, which is two truths and one lie.
Ah,
You ever
okay.
heard of that?
Yes.
So I was like, I don't want to lie, but anyhow, well,
Yeah.
but it's for the fun of it to
Yeah,
try
yeah.
and identify what is the lie. And I always say, hey, I have a podcast, I have 3 kids, and I run marathons. That's the part that I think, I don't know if you've seen where I'm going with this, but
Yeah.
most people say the lies hit the marathons.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I don't look like that. So I usually have that jacket, so you don't really see my physique, and my face is not shaped as a slim or file like you're with your beautiful beard. So I think I don't look like I run marathons.
Ah, there you
But
go.
then maybe the people get I guess what I'm saying.
But the
People
truth is,
get-
he only has 2 kids.
Yeah.
the truth is I only have 2 kids. But I think people get surprised by that.
Yeah.
I don't know what else would be surprising. Oh,
Here we go.
I don't know if I should say this. But
Oh, well, then you definitely should.
Will it incriminate you?
For various reasons, I don't know. But I
Okay.
don't want to.
We can cut it out.
This is a
No, we can't. We're
premiere,
live.
and I will never say this again. And if it does sound like funny, please do cut it out. It's gonna be live though.
Yeah.
So I did a doctorate in psychology. Usually in clinical, I specialize in suicidology. That's not surprising necessarily. It usually goes 3-5 years. I did it in 20 months.
Wow.
Wow.
You're surprised.
Yeah, I am. Especially because you just told us you were doing that whilst working full time.
Henceforth, I told you the
Yeah,
gray
you went
hair.
grey. Yeah.
I was a killer. But
Actually, this is a new look because normally you're fully shaven.
correct. To the liking of my wife, I left whatever remains.
Oh. See his commitment. He's a husband first.
Oh no! Next year it's going off.
Next year it's gone.
It's just too much work.
Hey, listen,
But,
we can't be perfect husbands, right?
We can try. Yeah. But anyhow, that's
cool.
not-
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Just thought it'd be fun.
Yeah. No, that's good. So you get to do that to him another time. So.
Okay.
Oh no.
Next episode.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. By then you like settled in, so you're part of the team then, and so then you can start like firing barbs to others. So.
That's right. Can I introduce Saul? So we can get on track.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start before we look at Saul. I wanted to just give it that little bit of context. So Saul is kind of introduced in 1 Samuel chapter 9, if I'm correct. But in 1 Samuel chapter 8, there's a really interesting sort of precursor to the ministry of Saul as the first king of Israel, and that is that God had said to Israel, you're best off without a king. And they had said, no, we know better. We want a king.
Yeah.
And God had spelled out to them exactly what would happen if they had a king, right?
Yeah.
And they could have just looked around them to all of the other nations that were surrounding them and realized that was true,
Yeah.
right? But they wanted to be like the other nations. They wanted to be sort of respected, if you like, by the other nations.
Yeah,
by the fact that
they
had a
saw
king.
the prestige of the other nations and that blinded them to all the bad stuff you're
Right.
about to mention.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and so, God says to them, if you have a king, this will be the behavior of the king. He'll reign over you. He'll take your sons and appoint them to his chariots. He will appoint captains over the thousands of his armies, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it just gets worse, so I'm just going to stop there. And then God says, okay, if that's what you really want, he sort of gives them over, to use the language of Romans chapter 1, to what they wished, right? And he says, okay, you can have a king, right? I've told you what will happen, but that's your choice. Fine, that's fine. And so he then, in respect of the children of Israel's wishes,
Yes.
he then appoints, not appoints, but asks the prophet Samuel to go and anoint a king of Israel. And that's where we meet Saul, right? So I just thought it's interesting, the context. And I'm going to be curious to find out from you, Dan, whether you feel like that has any impact then on what we are going to read about Saul.
Okay.
But then let's just read the introduction of Saul. So they're looking for a king. Samuel said to the men of Israel, go to his city. And it says in chapter 9, verse 1, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel. I'm not sure how to pronounce these words. Son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, the son of Aphia, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people.
Okay.
So that's the introduction that we get to Saul, right? He was a tall, dark, and handsome man.
Okay.
Just like
Yeah.
Dan.
Just like Dan. That's
I don't
right.
know about the tall part, but yeah. So I guess the question here is, what do we know about him? And you just read it. Let's just dissect them again. You just say he was good looking.
Right.
The interesting thing, he was from, we could consider one of the lesser of the tribes in some ways. Maybe the Benjamites.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily bad, but
They're tiny.
Not the
they
most
were
prominent.
The smallest. Yeah, that's right.
But it does say that he came from a good pedigree, right? Because he says that his
Correct.
father was a mighty man of power.
Correct.
Yeah.
So as you gave the context, which I think was really good, is that God gives into, okay, I'm gonna help you and hopefully in the helping you through this, I agreeing to what you're requesting, you'll see your error, or you get back to my ways. But he chose somebody good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So because God made the choosing in all of the kings, at least from the beginning, and later on he sidetracked into whoever was the son of the son. But
Yeah.
God, we could challenge that idea actually. That we know the Bible says God places and removes kings.
Right.
But he chose this guy. He chose the best.
Right.
So what went wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't even take that long, right? Like,
For him to go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take? I don't know.
Well, I mean, obviously.
About one chapter? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, he's anointed.
How many years is that chapter?
Yeah, that's what I want to know, because he's appointed king, or either that or something. Nothing significant happened through that time frame. So, chapter 10, he's anointed king. He's proclaimed king. Chapter 11, he saves Jabesh Gilead. 12 is his coronation, and 13 is the unlawful sacrifice.
Okay.
So that's not a lot of story before things start going pear shaped.
Yeah. So when you think of Saul, what comes to your mind straight away?
Good question.
Yeah, later life or early life, right?
Yeah.
Like my initial thought is always in pursuit of David, right? Like
Okay, so a persecutor.
Of him as a persecutor, typically.
Okay.
So, but that's not how he starts,
No.
I think I think of him as a powerful man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In control.
And that comes right from the beginning. That he was, the tallest sort of, we could say the strongest man amongst Israel, right?
Yeah.
But then even through his reign as king, like he was quite a powerful king.
Yeah. Okay.
Until we met David, of course. But
He killed his thousands.
Yeah. He killed his thousands. Funny, when I think about David, mainly because of the way it ended up, I think of somebody a bit of egomaniac.
David or
Which
Saul?
Saul. Sorry, Saul.
Yes.
Yes. I haven't sidetracked.
That's
yet.
okay.
Yeah, Saul. egomaniac, and that's an interesting thing because it tells you how we can mess up something that was so good.
Good, right.
So we are all can have a bit of a risk of something.
Right.
And yet, if we were to think about his mental instability, we know a couple of things in terms of his of some of the treatments that he had.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously, you're not in my mind, but what do you think in terms of treatments? Is there anything that you can think of that was used for him to something that it's well known, usually, that made him feel better?
Yeah.
Music.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Calmed him.
Yeah.
So that's when we because we don't know we had gaps into how he went. You know, last time we talked about David and David, we had a little bit more insights into his not only his background but how he went through some traumatic experiences. We could maybe argue the same for this guy, but he obviously is having music as somebody who you mentioned calm him down. So he was afflicted by something.
Mm-hmm.
He was afflicted by something emotionally. We could argue maybe spiritually. I don't know, but there is some level of turmoil.
Right. Can I just jump on the back of you saying an egomaniac is kind of what comes to mind for you? I wonder, there's that famous quote by Lord Acton that says power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I just wonder, what would Saul have been had he not been placed in that position where he had to be the king of Israel?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe he will have been better. I usually say it. I joked around, and I truly believe this, that I believe that God hasn't made me a millionaire, wealthy man because I probably will lose it.
Right.
I know how much I waste what I have. And imagine if I had just
more
to throw. Yeah. So, but having said that, God does say that he doesn't give more than what people can bear.
Mm-hmm.
So Saul could have handled the situation,
Right.
but something definitely went a little bit pear-shaped wrong in there.
Do you think, though, that would have contributed to what you were saying, that there was an affliction in Saul's life? Do you think that power that he had and maybe the responsibility could have been to do with that affliction?
Potentially, yes. But let's go back to this is a good contrast to... By the way, when I say egomaniac, I've said it very loosely. I don't know if he classifies to the full extent of the word, but there is elements of that. But if we go back to contrast his life with that of David, which we talked about last time, we have a lot of similarities. A lot of differences. For example, David, we kind of agree. The interesting thing about David is he came from a prominent tribe, Judah.
Yeah.
But he looked like, he was a shepherd boy. He wasn't
not necessarily a prominent family.
He was a nobody, but from a good tribe.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this guy was from a lesser tribe, but he was like a prominent guy, like a chief, son of a chief.
Big fish in a small bowl.
Correct. So that's a contrast. Then the other part that we have, we have similarities, such as both of them were chosen by God. We know that along the journey. But then when we talk about the practicalities of the experiential, then the life narratives, both of them went through what we talked about last time in terms of war.
Yeah.
It's very similar.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that he does, basically. He becomes king, and then he leads them and saves Jabesh Gilead.
Yeah.
So he has that
he goes to do
military
that.
experience.
Yeah, he does. So that on its own will have left him quite... we already talked about that last time, but for those who didn't watch or listen, traumatized. Traumatized. And that affliction could have come from that. That affliction, or at least will be a contributing factor without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And it's a bit hard for us in our context to understand that. We spoke about this when we were talking about David as well, that they weren't just kings who directed from their palace. They were frontline, fighters in the fight. These kings of Israel, at least Saul and David were.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, this is like first-hand trauma that they're experiencing because they're actually slaying people. Yeah.
I'd just like to move us a little bit further forward in the narrative where it talks about his unlawful sacrifice, right? In 1 Samuel chapter 13. It says, Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, he chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul at Michmash and in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people were sent away, every man to his tent. And Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And so he's calling the people together, and so there's this thing that's going on. But there is they want to make a sacrifice before it's happening, basically. So, but down to verse 9 it says, "So Saul said, 'Bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me.' And he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened, as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering, that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And Samuel said, 'What have you done?' And Saul said, 'When I saw the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down to me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he has commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, that the Lord has commanded him to be a commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you.' Then Samuel arose and went up to Gilgal, to Gibeah of Benjamin, and Saul numbered the people present with him, about 600 men." So, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in this, so 2 years into his reign, he is presented with a situation where I think this is probably the first evidence we see of that ego trip that we were talking about, where he goes, okay, well, he's not here in time. Samuel's not here to do the offering, and so I'm going to jump in and I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Moving away from the psychology and just from the normal,
Yeah.
The logical of the narrative, doesn't it sound a little bit too harsh? I mean, I'm thinking, obviously, the problem here was his egocentrism, and he's probably rash thinking. Say, like, I cannot wait for this guy. I'm just going to do it. There's a couple of things that come to my mind. What was wrong about sacrificing for God? I mean, since Adam, through the history, people were doing this. I mean, we see Abraham doing it, Isaac doing it, and Jacob doing it, and everybody sacrificing for God. Why couldn't he do it?
The way that Samuel responds to him indicates that there's been a very clear directive. And
Correct.
so I think that what we're looking at here, thinking about it chronologically, right? But prior to this, the Levites had been given the responsibility of sacrifice.
Correct.
And so because that happened in the Exodus experience, every child that was born, every firstborn that was born who would have been the priest of the family was brought back, and that responsibility was given to the Levites. And so it was very clearly understood that that was not appropriate for him to do.
So it was, and I think that's exactly what's taking place in here, and that's what will have an effect on his, in my lens, its mental stability, which is disobedience. Disobedience, it's one thing. His ego and his the way he saw himself will be another. I don't know how this was, and this is not even extrapolation. This is just whole imagination. Yeah. But Saul usually, I don't know if this conversation happened in private, or Saul will usually have people around him, his confidants, and so that will have been quite damaging to himself, saying, the priest is telling me off. I don't think he will handle that well. We know his ego was a big part of his life. Because also, Ben, you mentioned that idea of the thousands and the thousands, the 1,000 and 10,000s. He didn't like the fact that somebody was better than him, more successful than him. He was having more Instagram followers, more likes, more downloads in the episodes of the podcast, and he hated it. Yeah, he was like, this is not right. And that was the demise for him. Maybe you're right in that. Why can only the priest do this? Why I'm the king. Why did the old man have to come and do the sacrifice on my behalf? Cain, when you were reading that part, Cain came to my mind. Good intention.
Right.
But maybe it wasn't that good intention. And so Samuel says somebody after God's own heart is going to come, which we know it's David. And so he didn't have this good desire. It wasn't like, this is a sincere sacrifice. Right. I believe God will have spared him otherwise.
Also came to mind when you said, doesn't this seem a little bit harsh? Samuel's response is that, like, because Saul was the leader of the nation, he had a greater level of responsibility to do exactly what God had said.
Yeah. I'll qualify the reason. I think I sidetracked in my attention deficits, but I qualify what I was saying in terms of harshness. The reason why I thought, isn't it harsh? Because when we do that parallel comparison to David, I'm thinking, aren't you glad that I'm not God, guys? Because David would have been long gone before.
Yes. Yeah.
But God knew the intention and the heart, right?
Right.
But David had a responsibility. We talk about him. He killed people. He was homicidal, lustful, and whatever he did. We talk about him. But this guy is like, he's doing a sacrifice for God. He's coming and singing and praying in the altar of the church,
doing a good thing in a bad way.
And I think, though, that this was an attempt at redemption. From Samuel to question Saul in that way, because of that level of responsibility. It's kind of like, are you willing, like we talked about with David, to acknowledge, the place where your heart is at the moment. Recognize that, you might have, come at it with what looked like good intentions, but actually, God sees beyond that. And then if Saul had have been able to acknowledge that and move forward from a different place in his heart, and to actually act the way that God had intended him to, then maybe Saul's ministry would have been very different from that point forward.
Right.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point, because there's a bookend to this story, right? If you fast forward to chapter 15, where he's talking to he spared King Agag, right? And at that point, there is some intervening time in between the two, but the similar sort of thing. The command was to obliterate them, to kill all of them. And Samuel arrives and he's like, what's going on here? And Saul's response is not, I'm so sorry, I messed up. His response is, I've done what God commanded me to do. Like, give me some praise, show me some love. Like that's his approach. And I'm like, is this guy brain dead? Like, where is he coming from? But
it's so hard to see how he's justified.
But see, the thing he says, all I did was spare Agag. Basically I took a trophy, and that's okay. And
for his own self. And he goes back to feed him back self.
I know. And Samuel's response is like, well, okay, and what is this bleating of oxen that I hear? Like, why did you take all these spoils that God said don't take? And I love Saul's response, because he's trying to shift the blame there. He goes, but the people, I couldn't control the people. I find that...
No wonder you're not going to be king for long.
But I find that amazing, because he's saying I can't control the people. You go back, I think it's one chapter or two chapters.
Full control.
He has complete control. He says nobody's going to eat a single thing until this day's done. His son eats some honeycomb that he finds on the way, and he's going to kill his son because he ate something. And I'm like... You've got plenty of control, And so this is just him trying to evade. But obviously he feels convicted, right? There is something, he senses his own inadequacy in his role. He senses that he has done something wrong after he's called out on it. Up until that point, he has spun a narrative in his own... And I'm interested to hear what you think about this, because in my understanding of the way I read the text, he has sufficiently convinced himself that what he's doing is right. I don't think that it was consciously, I'm going to go do the wrong thing. It was, under these circumstances, what I'm doing is what God would want me to do. He has convinced himself that that disobedience is actually God's plan for him.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. Disobedience is God's plan for him. Look, you say, that maybe he changed, or he started to believe what wasn't really true. And there is actually evidence that shows that when we hold, but behold, you become changed, and you can change the way you see reality.
As a man thinks.
That's the reason why even when you go forensic psychologist, of which I am not one, I did study forensics in my master's, but I'm not qualified. But they do say that when you go witness accounts in court, you actually have to hold back some of the evidence and narratives, and they're not exposed to the accounts. You're actually away until you are meant to be witness, because otherwise you start creating false memories in your mind. So you can actually change the way you see things and start thinking, I'm doing the right thing. I'm the good guy here. Why am I being scolded? I think you're on the dot in there. I think you're on right on target.
On that point then, because obviously accuracy is important, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously it's important in court. But I mean, even for ourselves, how can we make a point of keeping our own understanding, our own self-awareness accurate? What can we do for that? Because obviously it wasn't helpful to him. He got himself into a really bad place as a result of rewriting his own narrative to fit his biases. How do we avoid doing that?
Well, one of the things that I can think of as you were mentioning that is making David's position was difficult. And I'll respond the idea, but David's position was difficult because he was Saul. Saul's position was difficult because he was the king. He was a great, in some ways maybe oppressive, because you mentioned he did have control. So everybody will be around him, probably not giving him the most sincere counsel. And so that's where, and this is where the practical is. Just talking about the practical everyday life living, surrounding ourselves with honest people who tell us, hey, this is messed up.
Accountability.
You need accountability. Accountability. Making sure that not only the people who tell us great things about ourselves are the ones that we're surrounding ourselves with. And that is important. One of the things that I ask in therapy sometimes to some of my patients who have a little bit of a struggle with self-worth is, hey, I want you to do an experiment. Go out there with people who you care, the most important people in your life, and say, hey, what do you think about me? And we break down different questions, but the gist of the whole thing is, what do you think about me? Give me a sincere account, things that I can grow for, opportunities of growth, and as well as things that I have of value. And then we talk about that. We don't necessarily, because the idea of here is, increase a little bit of more security and the positive attributes that they don't see. We don't go into the negative parts as much. But for this purpose, bringing, asking somebody, actually, everybody who listens to this, us included, let's go into that and see what people tell us. Are they being honest? Daniel, you are this. For people who are the closest to us. And if they don't, because they feel that they're going to hurt us, maybe we need to think about, does that speak about me, how they see me, that they don't think they can tell me? That goes back to that self-awareness. Or they're not really good enough friends for me to keep the closest to me, to keep me accountable. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So
truth tellers in your life.
Yeah, that's right. But also the other part is important, right? Not just like, you're not good enough friend, but also, hey, have I given this friend opportunity for them to feel safe enough to tell me the truth?
That's a really good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we can be quickly reading off people. And it's like, hey, maybe it's me. That's the problem. And that on its own tells me something.
Yeah.
So that's a way anyways.
No,
I think that idea about accountability is especially important in a leadership situation, which is what we see Saul in, right? If you're at the top of the tree in whichever tree you happen to be in, it's really important that you gather around you good people to be your accountability people, because otherwise,
didn't want to be accountable.
Sorry,
he didn't want to be accountable.
Yeah, that's right.
Why? What's the trait of personality?
It would be pride.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's what I think. That's the word that comes from.
Because it's interesting when we actually first meet Saul back in verse 8 and 9. It's a case of he was actually quite a humble man. By the time we're here in verse 15, he's very prideful and he doesn't want to hear about it. And talking about giving him a hard truth. So if you go actually a little bit further, Samuel certainly gives him. So not only just talking about the lowing and everything, he goes into, in verse 22, he's talking about, it's better to obey God than, offer him all these sacrifices. In verse 23, he starts comparing that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft.
That would have hit hard home to an Israelite, right? To us, that might be, whatever, I've read that a million times, but to them, that would have been like, you what?
And it's foreshadowing something chronic, isn't it? Like when you think about where he's going.
And the second half of that verse, because you have rejected the word of God, he has rejected you from being king. Saul is now, he's in panic mode. He's saying I've transgressed. Can you come and we'll get together so that I can be pardoned? However, we can see here that's a case of, I'm sorry for what I've done because of the consequences, not because
Yeah.
of the flaw in my character. And then Samuel reiterates that God has rejected you. You won't as king, so it won't pass to your line. So yeah, it was some really, really harsh words.
Yeah.
So and that probably talks about that idea of somebody comes after going so hard. He wasn't interested in reconnecting with the source of his spiritual appeasement. He was interested in the material kingdom
Yeah.
himself. The here and the now, he forgot about who gave him the kingdom, who appointed him, who said, hey, you're gonna be the one.
Yeah.
And I think pride is the key, because let us think about how many things happen as a result of pride. We neglectful, we cover up for, or we do not want to listen. And we cannot blame the guy again, because he had a lot of things going on for him. But this is something that naturally happens to us as human beings. I remember my kids when they were tiny little. And different kids, different tendencies. I will neglect to say which one was more inclined to this, but both of them, when they were doing something, I think there is about 2 years difference between my kids, and one will do something to the other, and they were tiny. Say, hey, you need to go and say I'm sorry, and they will cry straight away. Where did they learn that? I don't know. I'm thinking, like, is that me? Like, I get upset for saying sorry. I have made my task to actually say sorry a lot if needing and meaningfully, because of what I saw with my kids so little, that they were so pride-filled to actually apologize for something that they did wrong.
I really like that. That's a great parenting tip. No, but admit that you've done things wrong.
Yeah. That's where actually, this is a different topic. We can do some serious on parenting.
Let's do that sometime.
But rupture and repair. There's always ruptures and repairs in parenting, children relationships, as well as couples and friendships. And the repair comes with this idea of apology. Anyway, pride. Then if we fast forward into his life, what is next? I don't know what.
I wanted to read chapter 16, verse 14, because after this, David is anointed king.
Yes.
And it says immediately after that, it says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And that's where we get into that part that you were talking about. If we read on in verse 16, it talks about how that he would need to seek out someone who was a skillful player of the harp, and it just so happened that was David.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't have that peace.
Yeah. So what do you think about this idea of the distressing spirit coming after the Spirit of the Lord had departed?
Well, that's the idea of potential. This is where the signs lift us behind.
Right.
There is, a spiritual possession that we don't talk about, at least not here in the country where we live. Where I come from, we talk a lot about that.
Okay.
Spirituality and demonic stuff and inexplicable supernatural things are very not as uncommon as we would think.
It's kind of a blind spot in science, though.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the reason why it's hard to pathologize what is going on, but we just go by signs and symptoms. I mean, we could, and I want to be careful here, because I don't want to, when I think about what he was going through, that turmoil, that affliction, that shame, that guilt, that he is experiencing, that rage and anger, because that's what he was like. I don't want to say that if anybody who is listening to this, even us included sitting here on this table, if we have any of those, that means that we're
possessed or something.
by some weird spirit, a spirit of the devil,
right?
Because that's not the intention. But there could be an element of that for sure in this example.
It also probably indicates the fact that he hasn't resolved the issues, right? He hasn't made it right with God. He hasn't had the true repentance and forgiveness experience.
Correct. It's like goes back to that idea of grieving the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Lord. Grieving God by continuously declining to do what is right when you know what's right. I will seek your knowledge on this, which is what happened first. David meeting Saul before David's anointing, or he met and then he was anointed later. What do you think?
I think he was anointed first.
Okay.
I think.
So by the time David and Saul met, he was already anointed.
Yes.
Okay.
That seems to be the narrative.
Okay. In the sequence of
It's the way it's written.
Yeah. So
and an interesting detail here, which I don't know whether this is going to be instructive to what you're about to say. In verse 21, it says, David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly. and he became his armor bearer.
And here's the question.
Yeah.
Would he have loved him if he knew he was the anointed?
Right. Yeah, that is a good question because
Yeah.
I don't know whether at this point he knew that.
And I don't know. I was there to... Yeah.
Oh, so I was just going to point out that even if he was anointed, also got to remember that David is not an adult yet. Right?
No.
He's still a young.
kid.
He's still a young kid.
So might not see him as a threat.
Yeah, exactly. So is he looking at Saul as like let me put it this way: in David's mind, is Saul a bad guy, or is Saul?
No.
Yeah, and so,
Never.
exactly. And so if he's viewing Saul as God's anointed, he's probably thinking more like this is the best mentorship arrangement ever. I'm going to be the next king, and I get to learn from
From
this
the king
one.
himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even when he was just sidetracking there, we didn't talk about this last time, but even when he was being persecuted, David that is, didn't like when somebody wanted to kill the anointed of God.
Yeah.
That tells a lot about him.
Yeah. Very strong commitment, eh?
Yeah. But going back to the Saul idea, is he's very rational in some ways, very emotionally. His emotional reasoning is what he's being led by a lot, and his emotional reason is led by the perception he has of himself, right? So I was just asking about whether Saul had met David beforehand, because I think maybe he will have reacted differently. And the question here is for Saul: at what point in time did he see this guy as a threat? I mean, would it have been enough when he comes and he sees that this little guy kills a massive monster that him and the whole army is scared of? I have no idea.
It doesn't seem to be at that point in
Correct.
the narrative.
It happened until what happens, which is what Ben has mentioned
Yeah,
twice.
yeah.
Thousands and 10,000.
Sing
I
it
was
for
just
us,
looking
Ben.
for that.
Yeah.
That is when we see him like, ha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Public
This guy
opinion,
is a threat.
reputation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The likes, the promotion, this guy is...
It's that ego you were talking about.
Yeah, 100%. You know, when I compare my Instagram to Jasper Iturriaga's, Jasper, you're watching this?
Yeah. We love you, Jasper.
Yeah, it's like, this guy, we must hack his account and get rid of it. But
Start taking photos that look like his photos, and
I know, I need a camera like his first.
Yeah.
And the knowledge.
I was about to say, I
The
don't think
skill,
the camera
experience, and knowledge, it
Yeah.
won't make a difference. Yeah. He had this comparison. He went back to the pride. So that's the center of his issue, right? His personality became, maybe you could call it narcissistic in some ways. Self-centered, lack of accountability, oppression, putting people down to his own account, not being lack of accountability, not acknowledging what his real issues were. I think that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's
And do you think that because
thing.
of that, because of all of that build up, you could say in his experience, that the guilt, the need to defend himself, or all of that, do you think that was like the primary fuel for his hate and pursuit of David? The fact that he was not able to get peace from all of this, and so David was then the embodiment of his problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Pride holds us from acknowledging. And I think that's one of the insight and acknowledgement are different, right? Insight is recognizing a problem, but acknowledgement is like, I have a problem. I said it. I confess about it.
Own it.
You own it. You own it. So potentially, if he had gone through this process of acknowledgement, maybe things could have been different for him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would like to think that they would be.
I think you can almost guarantee that they would have been, because they were for David, right?
Yeah,
and as you said, there's some very similar like parallels between the two.
Yeah.
It's almost like the major difference is that David was willing to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he went back and forth. I mean, at some point in time, as you read, the spirit of the Lord left him, but he went back and forth between trying to be good and then he swept to be bad.
Yeah.
I mean, he was calling this David guy to help him because he was the only one who I believe came with God's spirit to play this sacred music that appeased his soul. And at the same time, every so often he will hate the guy.
Can I pose an alternate understanding of that verse?
Which one?
The verse that says that the Spirit of the Lord departed from him, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him.
Okay.
Because then when we read on at the end of the chapter, it says in verse 23, so it was whenever the Spirit from God was upon Paul that David would take his harp and play it, then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him, right? So certainly one legitimate application of that is to say that there was this sort of evil spirit that was, present with him, oppressing him in some way, right? But maybe another way you could read that would be, because it does seem to sound like the spirit that was distressing him came from the Lord, right? So you could say that was that sort of nagging of conscience that was getting at Saul whenever he had like a quiet moment, that he realized, like you said, that he had done wrong. And then when David would come and play, as you said, with the Spirit of the Lord present with David, that Saul would receive some refreshment from that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mentioned before the two, a couple of words, but the key words in terms of symptomatology, if you want to call it, but guilt and shame, which is what happens when, you mentioning that God is saying, hey, you're messing up, guilt and shame. So he comes and he gets a bit of appeasement.
Because I want to add to what I was saying. What Samuel didn't say to Saul is that God has rejected you. He said to him, God has rejected you as king. And those two things are two very different things. And so I think God is still pursuing Saul the person, right? And so he
didn't leave him to his own device.
Exactly.
I like what you're clarifying. So it's not like God left him and that's it, forget about him.
He's lost.
Yeah,
dead to me.
If I were to clinicalize this, or that's not even a word, pathologize this.
Hey, you're a doctor. You can make up your own words.
Shakespeare did it all the time.
Oh, okay. I never studied Shakespeare.
Oh, what I'm meaning is like a great percentage of the English language he invented.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Yeah.
When you don't do high school in here, I don't know. Cool.
That's right. I didn't finish high school. So.
You only know these things if you have an A2 pad, by the way.
It's true.
So scientifically
derailed.
Yeah.
Anyway, what were you saying?
Well, I'm thinking, let's think about the characteristics: guilt, shame, anger, lack of ability to recognize what's going on. I mean, some lack of insight. We have this personality trait, maybe narcissistic, but maybe a deep sunk depression. Some people were talking behind the scenes about this, right? That some people think, hey, maybe he was possessed. We'll talk about that a little bit now. But maybe he had a bipolarity of some kind. I don't necessarily see a bipolarity in some ways in terms of the manic symptomatology that we know necessarily clinically. But definitely this... If he were to be manic, which I don't see, it was more like a rage, and that's not just mania. It would be more of a manic depressive episode. It would probably be just more very, very sunken depressed. When we think about some people in some traditions and cultures and tribes, they say, my spirit is very downhearted. That's a very sophisticated way to say it, but that's the intention is to say like I'm super sad, super empty. There's an emptiness that comes with depression. This down spiral, and you feel like sad and empty and with no purpose and lost. And so David comes and he brings joy, appeasing with the music. What interests me as well is, I don't know if this has happened to me and this might not happen to you, but I know that there is areas of my life, in my journey rather, as a role, as my life narrative, where I have being in better places and sometimes in not so better places. And I would like to talk about the spiritual aspect right here. And sometimes when I'm in some of those not very good places spiritually, I actually don't like when people, I feel rebuked by meeting and hanging around people who I know are really good spiritually at that time, or I perceive it because I feel rebuked. I was like, I don't want to hang around these guys or these ladies or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Because it's a personal rebuke. And I'm just mentioning this. I don't have an answer to this, or maybe as we converse and bounce ideas, something will come. But it interests me so much to think that this guy was so wrong, and yet he liked David, who brought the Spirit of God. And he's like, I like to see this guy. And I wonder, if for me, it's like, I don't like to be around them because it rebukes me to think that they're vegan and I'm not. I'm not talking about that, but I'm just making a joke out of that. Maybe I shouldn't. But it is not that. It is the fact that for Saul, he's doing the opposite. He's liking this person, and sometimes I wonder, if we feel spiritually at peace to hang around people who are who we perceive, because we have this perception of levels, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I hang around there, I might be maybe I'll hold on to their ankle when they
As they ascend to the next level.
100%. Yeah, or if the Lord comes and
I'm going.
Right. And I wonder what was going on in David and Saul's mind. Obviously, the music was, and we know, scientifically speaking, by the way, we know that music therapy is an important thing. It is. It works.
Yeah.
There is science behind it.
I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah, it does work. Music therapy.
Can I pose a possible answer to your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, certainly not willing to say this is the answer, but it's a possible answer.
Possibility, yeah. That's what we're doing here.
As we were analysing David, one of the things that we noticed was that David was very authentic, right?
Yes.
And I suggested that maybe some of the Psalms that we read were some of the songs that David might have come and played and sang before Saul when he was having these episodes. And one of those characteristics of the Psalms is that they are just really just so raw, right? So maybe one of the reasons why Saul didn't feel that sense of rebuke that you're talking about with David, even though David had the Spirit of the Lord with him, was that David was authentic about his journey with the Spirit of the Lord.
Yeah,
and so
he wasn't like a holier than thou kind of figure in Saul's mind.
Exactly, right?
Yeah,
so
can come with that, yes.
And I say that from experience because I know that, when you have those times that you're talking about where you're not going so great and there are people in your life that you don't necessarily have that authentic friendship with, you feel very rebuked by it. But if you've got a friend who might be in a good place spiritually, but they're very authentic with you, I don't feel that. Do you know what I mean?
So we could argue that maybe they were close, very, very close. I mean, if he's your Amor Vera, you have to
Trust him.
trust him with your life.
Yeah.
So at what point in time does this guy decides to kill David?
Yeah.
Something, and this is where
Maybe it was one of those manic episodes.
maybe it was, but it lasted for too long. I don't know for how long because we don't have a time.
How long does a manic episode, what is the time limit for that?
Well, we don't have such a thing.
Okay.
But you could go for maybe weeks, months,
But
and
not
usually
years.
you'll crash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, what I
No,
meant by that
no.
though was that it might have been a catalyst, right? Well, he might have had one of those whether it was a depressive manic episode or a bipolar manic episode, doesn't really matter. But when he had one of those episodes, it
He
could have been a
went through-
catalyst for what sort of spurred him on in that direction.
Yeah, it could definitely be. I like to hold on to that comment that you made before in terms of God didn't reject him.
Yeah.
But I wonder if I don't know if that's what you alluded. I'm thinking you might have alluded to that, and if not, I'll bring it up because it looks like he thought that he did. Though.
Yes. Yes.
And this is where a bit of treatment comes. I mean, I don't know where we're in this episode, but
Yeah,
I'm thinking of resolutions
Go.
here, but maybe we're not.
But basically, the only thing I was going to talk about was his suicide. So, I guess,
Okay, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking here that there's a therapy in psychology, psychiatry that we call cognitive behavioral therapy. It continues to be the golden standard for most therapies in terms of depression, anxiety, even psychosis, because it has the most clinical trials evidence. And that therapy, there's a lot of things, but at large, is based on challenging belief systems. Belief systems that are based on evidence. And he lost track of that evidence that in despite of the things that he has done, God could have stricken him right there and then and kill him because that used to happen back then. And he knows the story of the Israelites. And he's still there alive and being brought some deliverance through David and his therapy. And I think he became hopeless. He became hopeless, which I think leads back to the end of his life.
Yep.
So what happened, I guess, at the end? He went to war. And then?
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify something you've been skirting around.
Okay, go.
And that is, you said, when did this happen, right? So the song that Ben's been bringing us back to, that David has killed his tens of thousands, and Saul his thousands. After that, it says, so Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that this distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played his music, etc., etc. In verse 11 says, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. And then in verse 12 it says, now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Which just really, I think, clarifies what you were saying there, that Saul had this faulty picture of God, right? That God was with David, but not with him,
me,
right?
yeah.
God likes David, but God doesn't like me, right? Whereas that wasn't what was going on in God's mind. It wasn't that he had stopped liking Saul.
Correct.
It's just he was unable to use Saul
Yeah.
anymore.
and I think at the literal level, it does continue to look like God just left him on his own device.
Yeah.
But it was, when you look, and we started very at the beginning, and how he did various things along the way of choices, declining God's counsel,
Mhm.
advice, requirements, requests, commands, and so it was David's doing.
Yeah.
Saul's doing.
Yeah, Saul's doing.
Saul's doing. I'm saying David. I'm looking.
We're translating now.
I'm glad you speak Spanish. It was Saul's doing, and okay, thank you for bringing that point of transition.
Yeah, and just to add to that again, what you're saying, I think David was God's messenger to Saul, right?
Mhm.
You know, Samuel had said, "I'm not coming to you anymore," right? But God kept sending David, right? And then even like, imagine how Saul felt on the morning after David had spared his life in the cave, when he realized he could have killed me, but he didn't. Right? That was God again inviting him to believe, I still love you.
Yeah.
And yet did he leave David alone?
No.
Yeah. Oh, David, my son. Like, I'm
Come
so
here, so I
glad.
kill
Come
you.
here to me. I love you. And then, yeah, like 5 minutes later,
Stab him on the back.
Yeah.
But another thing that, I mean, you mentioned that Samuel said, "I'm not coming here anymore," and you could imagine, I mean, giving some humane
Yes.
thoughts
Yeah, I
to
like that.
Saul. He's like, hey, you know, the pastor is not visiting me, the elders don't come anymore. Maybe because they're busy, or maybe because God said, like, you know, invest your time somewhere else. I don't know, and I'm on my own. I'm on my own.
Fully rejected, God and man.
Correct, but that wasn't the case. God was there. God was there, so it wasn't that he was rejected at all.
Yeah.
And that's where the therapy comes.
Yeah.
Hey, is there evidence that actually God is giving you opportunities? I'm interested in that text you read, because I don't know if we have any answers there, but saying that he prophesied. Was it David? Was it Saul? Or was it God? And I wonder if we can extrapolate and make holy imaginations here, assumptions that maybe that was the time to say, hey, you know, this guy who is coming to appease you, he's the next king. Like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Slam. There was a prophecy given. It was something that was
Yeah.
going to happen in the future. Who knows what that was?
Maybe.
But obviously it made him angry.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then anyhow, we come into his death,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Sorry for diverting you.
No,
I just thought it was important.
That's a good thing, because I think it is important.
Yeah.
So what happens at his death? He goes to war. They are he's losing the battle.
It's almost over.
Jonathan dies.
His
Yeah.
son
That
is
was a big
dead
catalyst.
gone.
Yep.
And he's about to get captured. And what did he say?
Still his ego is
Yeah.
present.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to be accountable for everything I've done.
Yeah.
Yep. Kill me.
Kill me now.
So, well, he asked his armor bearer too, but his armor bearer said, no.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, not happening.
And so he kills himself. And today we know that one of the factors that contribute to people's taking their lives is this sense of hopelessness and helplessness, which is a sad factor. There is more than that. It's very complex. I probably should make a bracket here with whoever listens, and maybe this is something we could have said in the previous episode, but talking about this stuff can be staring to people emotionally and mentally. So I mean, we're here in Australia. I know that you get listened and watched around the world, but in Australia, you know, there's Lifeline. There is some people don't want to talk through Lifeline. They can actually, now there is a service, SMS, text messaging through Lifeline. Do whatever you need. If you don't know what Lifeline is, Google Lifeline Australia and you'll find it. In the United States, which I should suspect you have a big audience as well,
50% or thereabouts.
there is also Lifeline. And so you just have to do Lifeline where you are and talk to somebody if you're feeling distressed.
Definitely.
And the other thing, this is not professional advice. That's something that we have to make sure that.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll make that clear.
Yeah. So so he comes to this point of despair, and he because of pride he's gone. So the question is, what could have avoided that? We talked a little bit about it already. Acknowledging the mess ups, owning it. We talked a little bit about forgiveness last time, but I think here it becomes very prominent. Saul couldn't see God forgiving him because I think when we can extrapolate, in his mind, forgiveness is restoration to everything he ever had. And that takes away the consequence, right?
Yeah.
And forgiveness doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It's like when we talk about last time, you come, you punch me or slap me, and I have the right to do it the same, eye for an eye. But I let it go because I forgive the right to retaliate or to damage you like you did. But when I forgive you, sometimes, if you keep on punching me every time I see you, do I have to keep on restoring that relationship? Maybe not.
Right. Might be a good time to walk away.
Yeah, I think about domestic violence as a very simple example, or very complex, rather serious example. But I'm thinking here that Saul is not seeking forgiveness, maybe because his heart is not in the right place. He doesn't have the intention. But also maybe he's seeking a restoration. It goes back to that pride, nilly-willy thing, my way or the highway. I want to be the king forever. And that could have been avoided by a simple, sincere forgiveness. And the verse in James comes to mind where it talks about confess your faults one to another, that you might be healed, and pray one for another. He had guilt of what he did. He had guilt of what he did to other people. He had guilt of knowing that he is persecuting somebody who is innocent. But he's not willing because of pride to acknowledge.
And so
that's sad.
The weight was just so big, right?
Yeah. Too big to bear. Anybody with that will struggle. We talked about last time about that poison cup. If you don't know what we're talking about, go and watch that episode.
Yeah, watch the first episode. That's right.
That poison cup, you're just killing yourself mentally, and in this case, he did it physically, and he's gone. Yeah.
Well,
those are my thoughts about him.
I would love to get you back on and talk specifically about suicide, because this is a very sort of closed window to suicide, the life of Saul, right? And there might be opportunity to explore that in further depth at another time. But something that I've noticed through both David and Saul's life that we've been exploring so far is that, and again, I mentioned this in the first episode, but I just think it's so important. When we see the humanity of David and Saul and all of the other biblical characters, we realize that there's a complexity to their life and their mental experience that I think sometimes we neglect when we read the Bible, right?
We tend to flatten it into good guys and bad guys.
Right. Right. But as you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, and I think it's crucial that we remember that, Saul was a good guy, right? And I think at heart, all the way along, he was a good guy, right? And that's why God was just trying to reach out, right? But he made decisions along the way that brought this burden and this complexity into his life, right? That never took him so far away from being a good guy that he could never come back, right? But they did take him further and further away from that, right? And at the end, like you said, it just got too much for him, and he couldn't bear it anymore. So which really, like, just to go back to your cognitive behavioral therapy idea, really brings, I guess, to the fore in my mind how important it is to be making good choices, thinking good thoughts, processing well, and sort of working through the complexities rather than letting the complexities rule our experience in the way that Saul did.
100%.
So just to sort of tie the ends of this episode together, I think obviously we've talked a lot about his experience, and we just talked about the fact he did commit suicide, and
took his own life.
Yeah. Took his own life.
I think it's important to say it.
I was going to say, so I'm just
we'll
curious.
We'll come back and talk about it.
Oh, yeah, we'll come back and talk about that. All right, cool. Well, the thing that I was going to say is, even though obviously we know his end, but if Saul was to have consulted you before he met his end, what would have? I think we already have highlighted it, but just to be clear about it, I guess, what would you have recommended to him if he was in that position, thinking the way he was thinking?
Sure. Definitely music therapy, because it works for him as a more regular treatment, not just as an sporadic thing.
Yeah.
But I think going back to processing the things that were afflicting him, and which is basically what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So acknowledging that process.
What is afflicting you right now, right here is, and I think next episode when we record, we will talk a little bit about this, I reckon, because it's important. Or maybe not, I don't know, but going against your own conscience.
Yeah.
This is what we call cognitive dissonance. When you go against your own conscience, you're going to be afflicted. There is no way out of that. You can go and live as happy as you can. You can exercise. You can exercise, eat well, drink well, be tempered. But if you are constantly challenging your conscious beliefs of what is right, you're not gonna feel peace. You're just gonna have a lack of peace. That's just the bottom line. Sometimes, and this is the thing. I mean, this is my perception. This is not psychology. This is more maybe more Christian theology of some kind. But and this is my perception of. There were many things that he needed to make right with people that he had damaged, and I'm sure there were many things that nobody knew he did that he could just have a peace with God.
Yeah.
So both things need to be implemented. You know, there's many things that we do. I think, I don't know if the Bible says it or some spiritual writings that talk about, you know, sins or wrongdoings that we do in our secret chambers. Yeah. Right. So those things you can do with God. It hasn't damaged anybody. Maybe you have sinned against somebody, but not really at the physical and real, tangible level. Just fix them with God. And then you have the things that when you have, you know, really messed it up and it's tangible and and people are suffering as a result, like David, poor guy, you know, doing his own therapy journaling and traumatized because he's being followed by this guy trying to be killed. Killing him. So that's what I will do. I will go back to, hey, you know, what is afflicting your conscience? A lot of people today carry a lot of that guilt and shame. Usually when there is depression that is not clinical, and there is this is probably a different episode, there is different kinds of depression, we come to some aspects of relational linked depressions. And most of the time, relational linked depressions are to do with resentment. And when you look at it, why cannot we let go of resentment? It's because it hurts us. It hurts ourselves, the self, the pride, how dare you did that to me, the most handsome, complex, olive-looking guy, king of the Israelites. Cannot be like that. Not even you, God, can do that. I'm the king. You cannot let me not be the king. So, yeah. So that's what I will do. And people can do that. People can do that. Through therapy or through with God. And this is the beautiful thing about the godly thing, the spiritual aspect, the religious spirituality, is that it's free. And sometimes it is about that. There is other times when you need you definitely need professional help. And I think Saul will have needed professional help. He needed something. But that part that was holding him back from being at peace could have been solved a little bit earlier along the piece.
Amen.
And I think that's a good reminder as well, that it's a lot easier to fix the problems when they occur rather than trying to fix it when there's so much complexity 10 years down the track. So right now is always the best time to take action to fix something.
Today we have,
Well,
beautiful.
We are going to stop this one right there. We will catch you guys next week for another episode. If you've enjoyed this one, please share it with your friends. And thank you for journeying with us through these Bible characters. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.